Okay, we're starting this episode off a little bit different from usual. If you've followed me long enough, you know I am a huge proponent of content warnings. This new episode of Spookier Times is about the revenge film. If you are not prepared for a discussion of a film form that bases itself largely on violence against women, minorities, LGBTQ people, and other people in a lesser position of power in society, as well as sexual violence, I recommend you don't listen to this episode. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the new episode of Spookier Times, a podcast of horror, gothic, and weird fiction across media. I'm your host, Robert J. Gannon. You can find me there on all social media. I am the editor of Sketching Details, an entertainment media website specializing in horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. And tonight's topic is the revenge film. If you don't know what the revenge film is, it also has another name. It's part of why I put the content warning at the top of the episode. The more formal name, as it's been used and defined in academia, is the rape and revenge film. Someone is taken advantage of and left for dead either physically or metaphorically in society. And throughout the rest of the film, somehow they are avenged. Revenge happens. This is a genre that dates back surprisingly long in history in American cinema. Really the early predecessor for the revenge film that really grew to prominence in the late 50s, early 60s with the Car and the Vigilante film before becoming its own real big thing in the 60s into the 70s was the cautionary films of the 30s and 40s. When the Hays Code was instituted and they could no longer just show whatever they wanted to with drugs and sex and alcohol and whatever you want with mayhem on screen, they needed a way to justify what audiences actually wanted to see. Those films did very well, especially horror films, especially violent, risque films in the 20s into the early 30s. So they created the cautionary film, which is that genre where they show you all the terrible things that will happen if you do choose to go out to that party and get drunk, or you do choose to smoke marijuana, or you do choose to sleep with your boyfriend. All of that stuff is shown in huge detail to really let the audience know, this doesn't look too good, right? Wink, wink. When really it's there to show the audience what they had seen for almost 2 decades before the Hays Code was instituted. The form took on a life of its own when the restrictions were relaxed and became the stuff of B pictures, drive-ins, and grindhouses. The most famous revenge film of all time is still I Spit on Your Grave. It is the one that establishes all the tropes in their clearest form. You have a woman who is victimized by a group of men she does not know, is left for dead, and they take joy in the fact that they have destroyed her. Throughout the rest of the film, one by one, they get their comeuppance, and the audience is meant to cheer and celebrate as it happens. The inciting incident in a revenge film, the moment that requires justice be served, for decades was always shown on screen in full detail in a way meant to excite the right kind of audience. That's the disgusting part of the genre. I have studied the revenge film a lot for reasons I'm not comfortable going into online. Point blank, we're leaving it there. I like to see how people choose to portray these violent crimes and how an audience can be convinced that even more violent action taken in their stead in response is worthy and worth celebrating and worth championing for. People don't usually get justice like that in real life, But if it happens on cinema, people care. That's one of the most upsetting aspects of the revenge film. Cut to 1992, Women in Chainsaws, the landmark piece of horror criticism that defined terms like The Final Girl, and introduced the notion that the revenge film is a feminist form. And that is how I view it. As exploitative as those violent scenes can be against the victims, regardless of gender, age, race, disability, sexuality, whatever makes them the other, worthy of being victimized by these monsters in the film. These human monsters that can just slip back into their daily life like nothing happened, where the victim is left forever changed. Intended or not, as we review these films and look at them in a contemporary lens, the entire point now is seeing justice served for violence against people who do not act like straight men. These could be women, these could be queer people, these could be disabled people, these can be the elderly, these can be people of different races. It doesn't matter. There is something different about this victim. And they take joy in trying to snuff the life out of them. Any joy they have is stolen forever in that moment. This understanding of the feminist revenge film and the form itself, once you get into the actual proper revenge film, being a feminist form of horror, has informed generations of female filmmakers now. One of my favorite films of all time is Jen and Sylvia Soska's American Mary. This is a body-positive, feminist, queer-friendly, inclusive horror film that is also a revenge film. The titular character of Mary is forced out of med school because her professors take advantage of her at a party. What is so different about American Mary and many other revenge films directed and written by women in the 2000s is Mary takes her own revenge. One of the more problematic tropes in the older form of the revenge film was that the victim very rarely had any role in getting their revenge. Someone else had to save them. Whether this was because they were already dead, literally dead, or they just could not function anymore. Their revenge was not their own to take. Films like the Soska's American Mary, Coralie Farget's Revenge, and Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale see the victim, and specifically in these films, the woman, have agency in reclaiming her own life and story against the men, and it's always more than one, the men that try to steal it from them. Why am I talking about the revenge film now? Well, first of all, I never talk about them. If you know me in person, you know that's true. It is finally safe in the United States to rent and watch the wonderful new revenge film, Promising Young Woman. This is the directorial debut, feature-length debut of writer-director Emerald Fennell. It debuted in Sundance to critical acclaim. There's a very good chance that lead actress Carey Mulligan is going to be nominated for an Oscar for a revenge film. That is how good we're talking here. So what is the basic premise? Well, I could say which one, but I'm going to leave it to what you would know from the trailer. Because the less you know going in, the better this is going to be. Cassandra is a 30-year-old woman who's kind of stuck in her life. And what she does now is once a week, she'll dress up, she'll go to a different bar, she'll pretend to be completely inebriated, unable to consent, barely able to function, to see if one of the good guys will offer to help her. Inevitably, when they do, they push their luck, they push their boundaries, and Cassandra has to put them in their place. There's so much more going on in this film. Much like American Mary, Cassandra was a medical student who dropped out because of the incident that causes the revenge to be the focus of her life, right? Here's the thing. Emerald Fennell is a genius. I'll say it right now. This is her debut film. I am sure we will see amazing, incredible things from her throughout her entire career. Why? Her mastery of form and color and direction and writing and beats and emotional manipulation and tricking the audience and suspense and hiding things in plain sight. Most filmmakers spend a career learning how to do this, and she did it on her first feature film. I consider myself a scholar of the revenge film. And my first, second, and even third time watching this, I did not see everything happening that happened. I did not anticipate it. I did not think it was possible. I couldn't believe it the first time. I couldn't believe it the third. It is marvelous. This is a revenge film that takes the work of Men, Women, and Chainsaws. That takes the work of the early 2000s to mid 2000s to early 2010s revenge films that received critical acclaim on their own to a new level. The only way to fully free the revenge film from its purely exploitative origins is to rid the form of the tropes that define the revenge film. Promising Young Woman does not have a 3-act structure. It does not watch someone get taken advantage of, leading to the second act of that starts with their destruction and ends with the hero catching up with the villains, leading to the third act where the villains one by one get taken down. You are stuck in an endless cycle of the second and third act, the second and third act, the second and third act. Cassandra finds someone to go after. She gets her revenge. She goes back to her life where she's stuck in this state of depression and stasis where nothing is changing. And she finds someone else to take revenge on. Then she's back in her life stuck in a state of stasis and depression. Over and over for 2 hours. Oh, you find out what happened. Cassandra openly tells anyone who asks what happened. The problem is no one else remembers what happened. That is what fuels her revenge. And that is what fuels her depression and her anxiety and her inability to escape her past. Revenge has consumed her life. And as justified as it is, and believe me, it is justified. It is heartbreaking what you learn happens in this film. You just find out more and more and more. As justified as her choices are, you do not get the... Satisfaction is not the right word. Because if you're satisfied by the brutal acts of violence committed in revenge films, there's some other reason you're watching them. You're treating them like a slasher film rather than a feminist form. And if that's what makes you happy, have at it. We're not having the same discussion. You need the grounding influence in so many of these revenge films. You need the grounding influence of that shocking act of violence to be shown in some way on screen, to justify the build of rage that allows you to follow along with what is inevitably far more violent, even ironic, and disturbing when the revenge happens. The tiniest detail from the crime scene is turned against whoever was closest to it, and you are meant to cheer and celebrate. Celebrate? What is there to celebrate? There are victims in this story who will never get actual justice through society. Cassandra tries to go outside the rules of society and destroy her own life, willingly give up everything, to spend years building these plans and these tools and these skills to take revenge on these people one by one, who are so protected by the privileges afforded to them in modern society as straight, white people with money, that no actual harm could ever come to them. She is not out to murder them. She is not out to re-victimize herself by showing them what they did to their own bodies. She is there to enact psychological warfare on the villains of her life, so that their lives, no matter how perfect they seem on the outside, can never be the same. Whew. Promising Young Woman is a deconstruction of the revenge film. And there are things you will recognize. It is undoubtedly a revenge film, just in a brand new form that does not let you relax, that does not let you feel satisfied in any meaningful way. These people act like people do in actual society. Even when confronted with evidence of what they did, even when sitting face to face with the victim of their crimes, they find a way to not be responsible. And nothing, I can say this confidently without spoiling a thing, nothing that happens to these awful people in this film will ever compare to what Cassandra has been put through. That is the point. Revenge is not about your action as a viewer. It is about righting a wrong for a character who, even after achieving revenge, will never be the same. My recommendations for this week, I already said them. First up is one of, if not my favorite film of all time, American Mary by Jen and Sylvia Soska. Excellent, excellent revenge film. It does show what happens, but not in a way meant to excite anyone. It's actually shown in a close-up of the victim's face while it happens, which still takes my breath away. Second is Coralie Farget's Revenge. This starts in a very typical way. A woman is out with, her boyfriend, well, her husband in this case, her husband, and his friends who she really doesn't know, and she doesn't trust them, and then they do something bad, and then they try to hide it by literally leaving her for dead, but she doesn't die. And they made the mistake of teaching her how to hunt because they thought it would be funny to watch her do it with her pretty little star earrings and her blonde hair and her perfect little body. It is magnificent. It is, to me, the gold standard for more traditional revenge films, and still one of my most successful reviews of all time. Google still will not pay me for the weekend that Coralie Fargette herself found my review of Revenge and shared it. And made her production team share it, and made the publicity team share it, and suddenly had over 1 million people show up at my site, and Google said, no you didn't. I got the receipts. Third and final is the most difficult one of these to watch, except for Promising Young Woman, we already discussed, so that's completely different. Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale. That's not just a revenge film, that's a film about colonialism and racism. It's a period film set in the 1800s in Australia about not just the exploitation and victimization of women, but the exploitation of the native people of the island. It is stunning, but it is also brutal, and I recommend you look up content warnings and even a plot description to make sure you are safe to watch it. It is Jennifer Kent's follow-up to The Babadook, and it is a much more mature every level, and very difficult to watch, but so worth it to see someone tackle these issues with such skill. That is going to be it for this episode of Spookier Times. Once again, I am your host, Robert J. Gannon. You can find me there on all social media. You can read my writing 5 days a week at Sketching Detail. I am also live on twitch.tv/otherrobert 5 days a week starting at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, playing games like Monster Train, Tell Me Why from Don't Not Games, all kinds of fun stuff. There is also the daily audiobook version of sketchingdetails.com, also available on all podcasting services. My book, hashtag The Collection of Horror Essays Volume 1, is available on all ebook platforms and most audiobook platforms. The best place to get it is my ko-fi.com/robertjgannon/shop, which is where you can also find my original short musical and all kinds of other fun things. I also just launched my merch store featuring the signature Spookier Times logo on a long sleeve tee and a tote bag, which you can find at the website sketchingdetails.com on the new merch page. Until next time, explore media safely, have fun, find what you're passionate about like I'm passionate about the revenge film form.